Okay, so you came to the right training to learn all about beekeeping. I myself am a beekeeper, a registered beekeeper, and a lot of the programming I've done in the past has been with all kinds of beekeepers. We go through like a series of classes, starting out with what the rules are. Then we'll go into, you want to become a beekeeper, what is all the equipment you need? So all of this, just because you're just trying to learn the rules for whether he's meeting the standards or not. You probably won't want to see those series, but you could if you wanted to. Let me tell my audience to please silence their phones. So we're gonna go through this really quick as a tag team between me and Becky Deenan. She's actually our local beekeeper. I'm sorry, she is a beekeeper herself. She's the Florida Department of Agriculture inspector for this area, and we'll get more with her information here in a minute I'm going to switch it over to her to go over the rules. So because this is open to general public, I always like to start out with some of these cool statistics so people understand the impact of beekeeping. So back in 2000, and this has not been updated since COVID, but I can tell you that with the 2018 2020 numbers are now even much higher than this. But if you look at the registered beekeepers and the registered colonies, so these are just those people that have taken their time to actually register their colonies. So there's a lot more out there, but these are just that we're only counting those that go through the state office and register their hives. So in 2006, you can see we had 165,000 hives, and then back in 2018, you can see how that number jumped to 620,000. So it's a huge, that's like almost 300 and some % jump. And then the same thing for the registered beekeepers, we have 631. Now, the reason you see the big disparity between the numbers is one registered beekeeper may have anywhere from one colony the whole way up to hundreds of colonies. So that's why you see that, well, how can we have 631 registered keepers, and then a lot more colonies? And then look, in 2018, that number of registered beekeepers jumped to 5,000. So a lot of it's because of the awareness of trying to protect the bees. Colony collapse is real, and there's a lot of people out there that really care about the environment. They also know the fun statistic that every third piece of food that goes into your mouth, a bee needed to pollinate the plant that it was in that mixture of food. So even like ice cream, a bee is responsible for something in ice cream. And then not all foods, but for the most part, every third bite that goes in your mouth, a bee had to pollinate the plant. So more people are getting concerned, and what we're hoping is that more and more people will actually get registered and go through the process, and we'll explain why registration is really important for beekeepers. So we have a couple objectives kind of to go through the registration process. Then we're going to talk about the apiary location, its identification, how we identify our hives once we register them, and then what entails the inspection process. We'll talk about moving bees, and a lot of this may not be applicable to you just because you're more concerned about what's happening on your property. And then we'll go through bee removal process, and then I'll finish up with selling of honey, the rules behind Cottage Food Act, the Cottage Food Rules, to if like the guy that's on your property, if he wants to actually sell honey, there's actually rules that he has to follow to do that. Any questions?
Nope, you're good.
All right. All right, so I'm going to turn the program over to Becky to kind of go through the stuff for the Florida Department of Agriculture, because this is her baby.
Thanks, Lisa. We appreciate it. I'm going to share also one of the other reasons why I believe that those numbers jumped so much from 2006 to 2018 was because in 2012, the state of Florida allowed beekeepers to keep bees in their own backyard. So backyard beekeeping actually became rules that you could do that statewide unless you're in a homeowners association. And we'll go through those rules and how you can keep bees in your backyard. But that allowed not just a commercial beekeeper to keep bees, but everyone. So that was really neat. So beekeeping registration is required by the state. If you have even one colony, you are supposed to be registered. As Lisa had mentioned, there are some beekeepers out there that have not registered with the state, but they should. And there's some reasons that it's helpful for not only the beekeepers, but for us to keep track of how many bees we have. We can protect the beekeeper if there were complaints, as long as they're following the best management requirements, and we'll go through those as well. So to maintain honeybee colonies in Florida, again, you have to be registered with the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. This requires an annual renewal. Depending upon how many hives you have is the cost. I would tell you for beekeeping, we're probably the cheapest thing you're going to invest in with beekeeping is our fee. 1 to 5 colonies is only $10 annually. And even those commercial beekeepers that keep over 500 colonies, it's $100 a year. So our fees are very reasonable, and should not be a reason for you not to register. So registered beekeepers in Florida do go through that process to become registered. And then we do, as myself, an inspector, we have 10 other inspectors. Well, we have 10 total inspectors in the state of Florida that manage the beekeepers that are registered. And by managing them, we go out and do an inspection with the beekeeper to determine certain things. We will contact you to schedule an inspection. You can contact us and tell us that you're getting bees, and we can go out and do your registration process there at your own location and do your inspection together all at once, or you can go online and register. And once you do that, then we would call you for an inspection. We are here to really help our beekeepers. We're not here to tell you you've broken the law and you have to pay a fine to do so. We're here to actually help you as a beekeeper and also help the neighbors that are surrounding the beekeepers that are keeping them to make sure they're safe as well. If we do find a violation, we give you a certain time frame to get that violation in order. So don't feel intimidated by the inspector. One of the things that we are looking for specifically is American foul brood. It's a disease that can take over a hive. Unfortunately, there's no way to get rid of that other than to burn the hive, because it is a spore that can continue to be present for many, many years. They've found spores on hive tools and hive equipment that's been over 80 years old. So that spore is available to continue to stay alive and infect other hives. So we as a state require you to burn the equipment if we find it. You can do eradication of it, but it's a very costly process, and there's only 1 or 2 places that you can actually go to have that done. So we recommend it being burned. So here's my contact information. I take care of Manatee, Pinellas, Hillsborough, and Hernando counties. We also have Chris Alonzo, who takes care of Sarasota and those counties south on the West Coast. So there is our contact information. Please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have questions or you just want to get registered as well. So people ask, where do I put my bees? Your bees should be located, of course. You've got the right to now keep them on agricultural land. You can do wherever you would like to keep your bees, but just keep your neighbors in mind as well. Or you can do the beekeeping operation in your own backyard. When hives are on non-agricultural land, you do have to sign a beekeeper compliance agreement and follow the best management requirements. We're going to go through those so you know what they are. Registration on the website. There's no person to explain the process. You don't actually get individual questions answered. It is something that you can go do online. You can pay your fee. I will share with you, if you read through it thoroughly. It's a little confusing because it does say you need to have your inspection before you register. Although we really would like for you to register before you have your inspection, because we only want to come out and register your bees or inspect your bees, not just the land and where you're going to be placing it. So typically when you go on the website to register, it takes a couple weeks for that to get into the system. Once that does, we get a list of those new beekeepers, and then we'll contact you to set up your inspection. You also can just do the inspection through me by calling or by Chris. We can set up that appointment to inspect your bees and do your registration all at one time as well. The best management requirements, or what we call the BMR, are for beekeepers that are keeping bees on non-agricultural land. So it does not apply to those that have bees that lands are classified as agricultural. So if your colony is located within 15 feet from a property line, it has to be behind a flyaway barrier. It can be a 6-foot tall fence, dense vegetation, a brick wall, a building of some sort, anything that what it does is it allows the bees to come out of their hive, and then they come against that barrier and it makes the bees fly up into the air. So their bees then are not going straight across to your neighbor. It gives you a little bit more protection that the bees are not going to be in a flight path that's going to affect someone who's walking past. We do ask that you have a controlled area where your bees are. If your whole area of your yard is fenced in, that's perfectly fine. If not, then we want a separate fencing around your bees, so someone can't just go in and walk through and run right into the bees. So a controlled gated entrance. It can be a very simplified gate type of situation where you lift a rope off, or you can have an elaborate gating system as well. We do want them to be off public land. If you want to put bees on public land, you do have to get a permit from us to do so. We also require that there's a convenient water source for the bees. And that's really important because the bees themselves will utilize that not just to get a drink of water, but they bring that water back and they mix it with the honey or with the nectar and the pollen to make what we call a bee bread. It feeds their babies. They also use the water to air condition and cool their hive or keep it at a certain temperature. Bees will keep their inside the hive at 96 to 98 degrees temperature. So they utilize the water, especially here in Florida, to regulate that.
And Megan, I just wanted to make a comment on this last one here. We were running extremely late and you did not receive the best management requirements via email. I am going to send them out tomorrow morning.
I read that. Okay. I wasn't quite sure.
We were looking at public land and putting a beehive.
So, and you can also get that best management requirement on the Florida Department of Agriculture Consumer Services, FDACS. You can get it on their site as well, so you can find it there too. Colonies must not be located within 150 feet of any tethered or confined animals. So even if your neighbor has a dog that they tie up all the time, make sure that that's something you don't put your bees close enough so that an animal could get injured if the bees were to sting them and they couldn't run away. A lot of people ask me about chickens. As long as your chickens have a place to run and get away, they're fine. I've not had any incidences except for something that the chicken coop was very close to a bees and they ended up with some hives that the temperament of the bees were what I call very spicy or a little Africanized, and they actually did attack the chickens. So you want to make sure that your animals are safe as well as public. If it's within 150 feet of any public place where the people frequently travel, if there's sidewalks that people walk up and down, anywhere that people frequently are at, you've got to be at least 150 feet away. You also don't want to place your hives where it might impede emergency personnel to get in and save your life if something were to happen. So no hives at your front door or your back door. The only way you aren't able to keep bees in the state of Florida is if you are in a deed restricted area. If you live in a homeowners association and there are restrictions in their deeds, and bylaws state that there's no honeybees allowed, then you have to abide by their rules and not the state.
Jumping in, we're tag teaming here and she doesn't know when I'm going to jump in. The
Okay.
other, the city of Bradenton does not allow bees in their jurisdiction.
Well, that we could argue.
Yeah, well, that's what I have called up to find out. And they
So
said
I
that-
will tell you that we have done that before. The state actually supersedes the cities.
okay.
So if you want to fight that, just come
Okay,
ask me.
I like to
maybe
hear
give
that.
you a little bit of help. There, we have heard that before on certain areas, but the state laws actually supersede the cities.
Okay, good.
Bylaws are the ones that you sign it, so you say, okay, I'm not going to have bees. So that's interesting. I did not know that.
Mhm.
So best management requirements allow you to have a certain number of hives. So if you live on less than a quarter acre, you can only have 3 colonies in your backyard or in your yard. If it's a quarter acre to a half, you can have 6. And down our listing here, I won't go through the whole list, but you can see that as the land size gets larger, you are allowed to have more bees. You can also have double the amount of these colonies during swarm season or splits when you're making splits, but you're only allowed to have those for 60 days and no longer. At that point, then you would have to move your bees to another apiary location. Beekeepers can also sell their colonies if they need to. They can sell a nuke of bees or their colony of bees, but they can't sell individual queens unless they're classified as a queen breeder. We can talk about that in a few minutes too. So number of colonies is based on the land size itself. A beekeeper can have numerous apiaries. So you could have 3 on your property, and if your neighbor decides they like the bees there, they could have 3 on the neighbor's property, and you could manage their hives, and you'd have 2 apiaries at that point. So you could have 6 hives. That helps. We do ask that you inspect your colony at least once a month. The biggest question I get is brand new beekeepers come in, how often can I go in? Because they want to go in all the time. So honestly, for a brand new beekeeper, I tell you once a week is wonderful. You can learn what your bees are doing. You see the new growth on them. As you get to be a little more experienced, I would go to twice a month. That's actually an ideal time frame to go in because you can catch problems within that time. But at least once a month. So you know that the colony has its strength, they're having enough food coming in, and there's not a queen problem going on. If you do select to collect a swarm, or you go out and do a removal, because once you become a beekeeper, people know it, and they will ask you, please, I got bees, can you come and get them for me? You're allowed to do that as a registered beekeeper, but we do want you to requeen those colonies with a known European honeybee queen. We do have Africanized bees in Manatee County, Pinellas County, actually anywhere below the I-4 corridor, we definitely have Africanized bees. They are going up as we probably speak to other areas. Florida is a very migratory beekeeping location. So we get a lot of beekeepers that bring their bees in from out of state. They then take their bees out of state. So if they do have any Africanized bees, that's how they're traveling, unfortunately. We do our best, and that's part of my job, to determine whether beekeepers have Africanized bees, and we require you to requeen that hive or get rid of it. So requeen, requeen, requeen. You want nice bees. You don't want any Africanized stock, especially in a neighborhood. You can get a listing of queen breeders from me if you would like to. I can give you all of the queen breeders that are here in the state of Florida, and then you can find someone if you need to buy queens. We also want you to practice swarm control techniques. Right now, during this time frame, the last month, it has been swarm season like crazy. The bees are leaving the hive to reproduce. That's their nature. The queen will leave and take half the hive with her. Then she'll leave eggs in the hive that she left, and they'll recreate a new queen cell. That queen will come out, has to go out and mate and come back. And now we have 2 hives That's the way that they reproduce. We want you as a beekeeper to try to determine when that's going to happen and make a split before those bees go to your neighbor's soffit or some other unfortunate place that we don't want the bees to go to. So that's part of beekeeping. We don't want you to be a bee haver. We want you to be a beekeeper. One of the things that you are required to do is to put your identification on your hive. It needs to be in permanent marker. That's perfectly fine. You can paint it on. You can get a branding iron. I don't recommend that for backyard beekeepers. They're kind of expensive, but you do want to put your 8-digit beginning with 480 on your box. Old time beekeepers will have FL and the digits and then their initial of their last name at the end of it. We don't use that registration process anymore. We're using a firm number everybody has, so they should just be numerical going forward. If you are making colonies to sell, the hives do not need to be marked at that time, of course, because a new beekeeper who's going to be buying it will put their number on it. They should be in the upper left-hand corner. Now, most boxes are, if this picture is a nuke, so we've got a longer side, but somebody always asks me which corner. I don't really care. What upper left? It doesn't matter. I don't care which side you put it on. Just put it up there. And the reason why we have it in the upper left is because if you were to sell any of your equipment, the next beekeeper could put their number below that, and it gives them plenty of room to do so. So anytime you relocate your colony outside of the state of Florida, well, let me go back. Anytime you relocate your colonies, you do have to have your certificate of beekeeping registration. So I always recommend to beekeepers, keep that in your car with you if you are moving bees at any time. This is where you also will get your firm number. At the very bottom, you see that little red circle around the bottom page. It says firm number. That's the number that's going to go on your box. Up in the top below the beehive is a registration number. Again, we're no longer issuing those. So the firm number is the number you want to place on your hive. But we also want you, if you're going to move bees and transport them outside the state of Florida, you have to have what we call an out-of-state permit. So you would just contact me. We have to make sure that you've been inspected within the year, and then we can issue you an out-of-state permit to take your bees. So if you are moving, you can take your bees with you. Packaged bees do need an affidavit confirming that the honey being used in them in the bees, that they're not using honey in the bees feed, and that's just simply to be able to prevent any kind of diseases that the bees might carry from passing different honeys on. If you're going to sell bees, like I mentioned, you can sell a nuke of bees when your hives, you're making splits and now I have no more room to place my hives, or I just want to maintain that 1 to 3 hives. You can sell them, but you can't sell queens individually unless you become a certified queen breeder. I'm not going to get into all the details of what that requires, but you do have to get that certificate from us. We test your hives and your queen stock that you're going to be making queen cells and new queens from, to determine and make sure they are not Africanized. And that's what's so important, to be able to not sell queens that are not of stock that we want. If you're planning to sell on a commercial scale, more than just a few colonies a year, you do have, it's written that you need to obtain a stock dealership certificate. We have not implemented that at this time, so don't worry about that. But there possibly that may come in the future. And of course, to get either of these certificates, just contact any of your inspectors. I'm going to pass it back now to Lisa, and she's going to share with you the rules for selling honey in the cottage food business.
So Megan, do you want me to go over this or not?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, good. Because he may choose to sell honey, and you can actually pass this information on to him. I'm going to send this presentation to you guys afterwards too, just so that you didn't have to feverishly take too many notes. So
I should probably ask if there was any questions before.
oh yeah.
Well, let's do
We
that
want to
since
go
it's-
back to, do you have any
Yeah.
questions, Megan?
I do not. Thank you.
So is there any concerns that you might have had with the beekeeper that's got, is he following what the things that we did describe here, or are there any concerns that you might want to ask about now?
Oh no, I don't think I had any concerns about what he was doing. I never know how close I can get, how much I should stay away from him, that kind of thing.
Oh,
So
gotcha. So
I just avoid that corner of my yard.
well, I'll share with you a little bit on that too. Nice European honeybees really are, they don't bother you. You could walk almost completely up to the hive as long as you're not banging into it and jarring it, and watch the bees. I have a lot of beekeepers that, just will put their chair right out front and kind of watch that activity. So gentle European bees is the stock that we want people to be using because they really are non-confrontational. Most people that get stung are swatting at the bees if they come near them. Just remain calm, walk backwards, back off from the bee if they're buzzing around your head a little bit, and you really aren't going to get stung. Most of the time that we as beekeepers get stung is we pull our veil off, or we pull our equipment off and we still have bees on our jacket, things of that nature. Unless we get into a hive that's what I call spicy girls. Yeah. So you should be able to enjoy your area.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. So let's go into some of the rules for selling your honey. So again, it's the Florida Department of Agriculture that is the regulatory agency, and the statute is here. The general information is here. What I try to warn people is if they want to sell honey at like a farmer's market or somewhere that's more localized, and there's some rules of how they can and can't do that. But most of our farmers markets here in Manatee County will actually require that they have a food handler's permit from the health department in order to sell at their farmers market. But to the Lakewood Ranch and downtown farmers market requires that. I'm not so sure about Newtown, which is down off in Sarasota. And then there might be some other smaller ones that I'm not familiar with. And then in some counties, they will actually require like a local business license to actually sell their honey. So I try to tell people, because sometimes I'll have people listening in from different counties, just to make sure that if you're going to sell your honey, make sure you go through the extension service or through the county and just see if there's any special permits you need to sell honey. But as far as the state is concerned, you can sell honey as long as you are selling it directly to the consumer. So you would not be able to sell it to a restaurant who would then have it on a counter and selling it to the public, because the public is their customer. It's not your customer. Your customer would have been that restaurant. So you have to be careful on how you sell it. You can take mail order. You can do your, it's hard to say that. You can take mail orders, but you cannot ship your honey through the mail. So you have to sell it, make arrangements, and then have them pick it up somewhere. You have to be suspicious if somebody's ordering like 30 jars, because usually when we sell it directly to a consumer, it's because they are consuming it, versus that person that's buying like 50 jars sounds like they may end up turning around and selling it somewhere else. So you'll have to be careful if you can question, somebody who's asking for like 50 jars, unless of course they're selling it for a wedding or something, like trying to give it as a gift to the people at the wedding. And we'll talk a little bit about that too. So there are some labeling requirements, and it's very specific to what's on that label. And unfortunately, this is probably the area that's breaks the rule the most. Although I could argue that a lot of people don't sell directly to the consumer. They'll put it at like a farmer's market on somebody else's stand. And that tends to be what I see more than anything. But anyway, it has to be in English. You must have your name, your address of where you are jarring that. And I'm going to define for you what a cottage food operation, what they call is an acceptable place to spin the honey and package it. but you cannot put a post office box on the label as the address. And the reason for this is if something were to ever happen that somebody would somehow get sick or something would happen that they've consumed that honey and they need to complain, the Florida Department of Agriculture needs to have an address to go back to and investigate whatever that complaint is. You also need on there the name of the product. I know it seems very obvious that it is honey, but like just having a bee on it is not sufficient. You must say honey. And then believe it or not, you have to list honey as the ingredient. If anybody ever cuts honey with corn syrup or anything like that, technically they should be putting it on the label. And if they ever do that, don't buy that honey. Sorry, I didn't say that. That's my personal opinion. But honey is high quality when it's all by itself and not cut with anything else. You must put the container weight, the weight of the honey that's in the jar. And then if you're making other things, let's say you're making a nut bread as part of your cottage food also, you must indicate on the label that the honey was spun in a facility where some of the allergens, and then you'd have to say what those allergens were. Most beekeepers that I know of, they spin their honey in their back screened in patio, which is fine. And if they're not doing their breads out there where the almonds or whatever the eggs are at, then they wouldn't necessarily, and make sure that I'm not speaking out of term here, they would not have to then say created in a facility that has allergens or where allergens are. And be careful on putting any kind of nutritional information. If you say something like, this is the best honey this side, or now actually that's a bad example. Let me say, if you say that this is good for eyesight, you cannot do that because you must then prove through to the Florida FDA, the Federal Drug and Alcohol, so that you must prove through them. I said drug and alcohol. I don't think that was the right one. The FDA. Yes. You have to prove to them why that honey is good for eyes. So do not, I actually have now so far at a farmer's market, actually saw one honey labeled that said that it was good for cuts and scratches. And believe it or not, I believe that also, but you cannot say that on the label unless you prove it to FDA that it's meeting whatever that characteristics you give to it. You can say it's good for you, but you have to be careful in those other type of things. Your font size must be 10. And believe me, that is huge when you get to some of these littler jars. Like I like to do the little teeny bear jars with my honey. And let me tell you, 10 font is like, I feel like it's like somebody wrote a marker with it. It's to me, it's really large. And then this statement that says made in a cottage food operation that is not subjected to Florida's food safety regulation must be on that label. That's another thing I never see. And that's what's important with this rule is you're not inspected and you do not have to meet the standards of like a certified kitchen. And that's what some of the things that fall under the cottage food law. So here's just like a couple recaps. So you can sell it from your home to the consumer. You can sell it at the flea market as long as it's you at the flea market selling it. You can sell it, same thing with the farmer's market, as long as it's you selling it. You can't give it to somebody else and let them sell it. You can have a little roadside stand out by, so you're the beekeeper that's on your property. He can put a little stand out there and he can sell it directly to people as they come by. And some of those exceptions are like, well, if somebody comes by and asks for 5 gallons, you have to be wary. And then special events, some of the information there is that the person who is holding the event is who you are selling it to. You are not selling it to the coordinator of the event because the coordinator isn't your customer. The person, usually it's the person getting married, you're selling it to them and then they can give it out as gifts. but it's just really important that it goes from your hands, the producer's hands, right into the consumer's hands. And then and I kind of touched on some of these where you cannot sell honey. And that's, if you look at this list, you'll immediately say, well, that's because you're not selling directly to that consumer. You're selling it to somebody else. So I've seen it in probably everyone. I've seen it in a consignment shop. I've seen it, let me see here. I think all of these, where I've seen it in a realtor's office already. However, after I started questioning them, and I'm not the regulator, but I just started like, oh, that's interesting. You have honey. And then, of course, it was like, well, do you keep bees? And she actually didn't. Her son kept the bees. So I kind of was like, well, that's fine. It's in the family, you know, kind of thing. Yeah, but I get mad because I try to follow the rules, and then it gets upsetting when other people don't follow the rules. So this list is what those that can create or bottle honey, these are just expected safety sanitation things that you should do. When you're bottling the honey, you should make sure that the area is clean. You should make sure your surfaces are clean if you're doing it inside. If you're spinning it outside and taking it inside, everything should be sanitized, clean. If you've got pets, you got to really, really be careful because their hair usually is up in the air and honey sticks to everything, or I should say it the other way, everything sticks to honey. So you really have to try to practice as clean as possible these different sanitation processes, washing your hands. And let me tell you, when you start spinning honey, you do wash your hands constantly. Try to stop, you know, like not wanting to lick your hand. Record keeping, and the only reason that it is suggested that you do record keeping is if somebody does get sick, or they find hair, or they find some foreign body or something in the honey, FDAX is going to want to come back and look at what are you doing, how are you doing, how much are you doing, etc. Because there is an amount you cannot sell more than $50,000 annually in honey. Once you go over that in sales, you are no longer considered cottage food. And I think that was on one of the first slides, and I forgot to point that amount out. So here's an example of places that are not considered your primary residence. So you must bottle it at your primary residence. If somebody is a snowbird and their primary residence is in Michigan and they travel through a motorhome like this and they want to do it in the motorhome, they cannot do that because it's not their primary residence. But you cannot do it in a rented kitchen, even though you think that's like, well, how sanitary can you get? That's really sanitary. You're not allowed to, because the whole thing behind cottage food is it's coming from your home. You're not relying on somebody else sanitizing and cleaning that area. No outbuildings, no barns because of sanitary reasons within the barn area. And then anything temporary housing, you should not be bottling there.